I walked into my son's wedding wearing the dress he once helped me pick, but instead of finding a seat like everyone else, I saw a trash can with my name on it. My daughter-in-law burst out laughing. It's just a joke, but their eyes weren't joking. If you think this is just another family drama, you're wrong. Don't forget to subscribe for more shocking stories just like this one. The snow outside fell like sifted flour over Denver's skyline, the kind that never seemed to stop. Flakes clung to the arched windows of Bellamont Senior Residence, Colorado's most exclusive elder care facility. Warm lighting spilled softly across the hardwood floors of its long corridors. Everything was curated here, the jazz playing low in the common room, the imported orchids in every hallway, the silent dignity of aging. But inside room 217, Marjorie Dunley, 82, sat motionless in a high-backed armchair, her fingers resting on the wooden arms like withering roots. She wore a deep green cardigan and an old pearl brooch that belonged to her mother, now slightly tilted. Her breath fogged the window in front of her. Beyond the glass, the world was white, still. She didn't blink for nearly a minute. She wasn't watching the snow. She was listening to the silence that echoed after laughter had long moved out of this place. Every morning, Belmont's staff entered briskly with polite voices and clinical smiles. They called her Mrs. Dunley, handed her pills she no longer questioned, and made her bed tighter than a hospital cot. Everything had its place. And yet Marjorie felt the creeping sense of being slowly erased. Outside her room, the world repeated itself like a broken record. At 7:05 a.m., the same elderly man in a blue sweater wandered by her door, muttering, "Where did my father leave the car?" He did it every morning. At 7:10 a.m., a woman named Bernice wheeled herself to the lobby and told the receptionist, "My husband is picking me up today. He'd died in 2003. At 7:13 a.m., two nurses rolled by with their coffee cups and whispered jokes about who was going to fall asleep mid-lunch today, laughter low and tired. And Bellamont had that strange, eerie rhythm, like a theater play stuck on loop where no one noticed the set was rotting behind the curtains. Marjorie, of course, noticed everything. She always had. She had once been a teacher, then a community organizer, then a mother, then a widow. Life had taken things from her one at a time like a careful thief. She had once hosted radio shows about women's history and spoken in front of city council about elder care. But none of that followed her into Bellamont. Here she was, just the quiet one in 217 who doesn't like bingo. Marjorie rose slowly from the chair, her joints protesting. She moved like someone trying not to disturb ghosts. She walked toward the vanity mirror near her armoire. It was part of the room's design, a tall oval set in a carved wooden frame, imported probably French. The staff wiped it every Friday. But lately she'd noticed something odd. The mirror was wrong, not cracked, not stained, just slightly cloudy like a breath that wouldn't leave the glass. Even stranger, the haze seemed to pulse like something behind it was alive. She leaned closer. The reflection wavered subtly. Her face, so familiar, so full of time's cruelty, was there. But around the edges of the frame, just a sliver was something else. Not her room, not the wallpaper. A faint glow, golden like the edge of a lantern seen through a paper wall. Her fingers hovered near the wood. The carving was intricate floral loops, Victorian flair. But in the top left corner, one rosette seemed off-center, almost displaced. She pressed her fingers to it. Nothing. She tried again this time, using both hands, one at the rosette, one at the base. There, a click. A soft mechanical snick so quiet it might have been imagined. Then a cool draft spilled from the mirror frame, though the window was closed. Her breath hitched. The glass shifted, just slightly. Marjorie stepped back. The entire mirror now seemed less like a mirror and more like a window. The cloudiness gave way to movement, shadows, faint outlines, people. No, too vague. Then a flash of light, not blinding but warm, dim, like candlelight in a church crypt. Her hand moved involuntarily to the glass. It wasn't cold. It wasn't warm either, just absent, like touching smoke. She flinched. Outside, someone knocked at another door. Laughter echoed down the hallway. Normalcy returned like a tide rushing back in. But the mirror remained altered, changed, like it had blinked. Marjorie swallowed. The taste of metal filled her mouth. Instinct, memory, fear. She turned away sharply. She wasn't ready, not yet. She moved back toward her chair but didn't sit. Instead, she opened a drawer in her nightstand and pulled out a small leather-bound notebook. Inside were years of notes, names, incidents, suspicions. Today she added a new line: mirror, room 217, frame ill false, light behind it, possible access, observe again tonight. She clicked the pen, closed the book, and slid it back into the drawer beneath a paperback no one had asked about in years. Back at the vanity, she stared once more. The glow had faded. The mirror was only a mirror again, almost. The rosette in the top left corner was still slightly off-center. The snow outside kept falling. A nurse's footsteps echoed somewhere distant. A faint song played over the intercom, a violin cover of something modern. And Marjorie? She narrowed her eyes. She was wide awake now. The night was unusually quiet. Not the kind of quiet that invites rest, but the kind that unsettles, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Marjorie lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. The fluorescent light from the hallway bled under her door, painting a narrow line of sterile blue across the floor. She could hear the distant squeak of a wheel, maybe a cart, maybe a chair, and the muffled cough of someone whose lungs were more memory than function. She turned onto her side. The mirror loomed at the edge of the room like a watchful sentinel. It was back to normal during the day. The haze was gone. But she knew what she saw, and she knew it wasn't finished with her. She sat up slowly, deliberately. Her slippers touched the floor like ghosts returning home. She crossed the room and for a moment just stood in front of the mirror, breathing in its silence. Her reflection stared back, calm, older than time, but not broken. Not yet. She reached up to the rosette in the corner, pressed once. Nothing. Then again this time, pushing her palm flat along the left side of the frame. A soft click. A groan of old hinges. The mirror didn't open outward. It slid. With a sound like a breath held too long being released, the entire frame shifted left, revealing not glass but wood. Raw, dark old wood. A door. Narrow, only wide enough for one person. The handle was a brass ring embedded in the wood, no lock. She hesitated. She thought about her daughter. About the photo on her desk. The one where Helen was still small, still reachable. She thought about Joe, the only man who still noticed things like the way the light fell at 4 p.m. Then she opened the door. It creaked, not like a movie, like something real. Old hinges, dust age. The scent that hit her was not of rot, but of medicine. That sterile lemon pine chemical reek masked over something much older, something human. The hallway beyond was narrow, unlit except for a faint bluish glow further in. No windows, just drywall insulation and the low, constant hum of something mechanical. She stepped inside. The door slid shut behind her, not loudly but definitively. Her breath caught in her throat. She listened. A faint beep, then a hiss, like a machine exhaling. Marjorie pressed forward, her fingers grazing the wall. After 3 steps, the floor beneath her shifted from hardwood to industrial vinyl. The walls changed too, exchanging floral wallpaper for gray paneling, smooth and cold. The corridor bent slightly to the right. She turned the corner and stopped. A room opened before her, lit by 3 overhead fluorescent bulbs that flickered faintly. The light was bluish, unforgiving. Against the far wall were photographs, rows of them, 8 by 10s in thin black frames mounted like a gallery. Marjorie stepped forward. Her breath slowed. Her heartbeat did not. Each photo was of a face, old, tired. Some smiling faintly, some caught mid-blink. Most looked unaware the photo was even being taken. Their names were etched on small brass plates beneath each frame. George, Eloise, Winston, Alma, Irene, Donald, Olive. Marjorie's hand rose involuntarily to her chest. She knew some of these people. She'd eaten lunch next to Irene, played bridge with Donald once before his hands began to shake. Olive, yes. Olive lived on the 3rd floor. She used to wear the same blue cardigan every Thursday, insisting it was Sunday. But Olive had been fine. Confused, yes, but fine. Marjorie stepped closer to Olive's photo. It was recent. She could tell from the wallpaper behind her the same as in her room, a timestamp in the corner of the photo 3 weeks ago. Then she noticed something else. Each frame had a date, not just a photo date, but another one, etched in smaller letters below the name. Deceased natural causes. A chill moved across her back, not cold, just wrong, like her blood itself paused to listen. Every face on this wall was dead, every one of them. She stared at Olive's photo for what felt like minutes. Her fingers brushed the edge of the frame. The plastic was warm from the artificial light, too warm. Then she heard it, a rhythmic whir followed by a deeper, almost wet sound, like breathing but mechanical. She turned her head slowly. To her left was another hallway, darker. At the far end, a machine, tall, thin, with blinking blue and red lights. Next to it, a chair, padded, strapped. The air was thick with the scent of something sterile, pine and metal and regret. Marjorie stepped backward. Her feet didn't make a sound. Above her, something clicked. She looked up. In the corner of the ceiling was a tiny round camera, black, unblinking, watching. She froze. Her lungs screamed, her skin crawled. Her instincts sharpened over 8 decades and countless betrayals screamed, leave. She backed toward the mirror, door hands outstretched. A faint sound behind her. Footsteps. No. Wheels. A cart. Coming closer. She turned and moved faster, reaching for the door. Her hands searched the wall frantically. No handle. The frame. Where had it been? Their left side rosette. Click. The wall moved. She slipped through, pulled the panel closed behind her, and pressed her back against it. Silence. Only her heart thudding in her ears. Room 217 greeted her like nothing had happened. The soft lamplight. The turned-down bed. The small television playing a muted black and white movie. Her knees buckled slightly and she slid into the armchair. Her hands trembled. She looked down at them, still shaking. Then her eyes drifted toward the mirror again. It was closed now. Just glass. Only her own frightened face staring back. She didn't sleep. She didn't blink for a long time. The next morning, breakfast was served in the common dining room. Oatmeal again, with bananas overly ripe. Marjorie picked at hers. She kept glancing toward the elevator. 3rd floor. That's where Olive had lived. She waited until the nurse turned to help another resident with his tray, then stood and walked calmly, slowly toward the elevator. Nobody stopped her. 3rd floor. The doors opened with a soft ding. The hallway was bright with morning sun. It felt false now, too cheerful, too clean. Marjorie passed 3 rooms before reaching 317. Olive's room. The nameplate was gone, just a smudge where it had been. The door was cracked open. She peeked in. Empty. Completely. The bed stripped, the closet ajar, the light off. Gone. Just gone. She found a nurse near the linen cart and approached with her best frail smile. "Excuse me, dear," she said softly. "Do you know where Olive has gone? We usually sit near each other for supper." The nurse didn't even pause her folding. "Oh, Olive, she passed last week, sweetie. In her sleep. Peaceful. Didn't even stir." Marjorie stared. "Are you sure?" The nurse gave her the kind of patronizing smile only the young can offer the old. "Absolutely. Her daughter came and picked up her things. Lovely woman. Seemed in shock. Happens more often than you'd think." Marjorie nodded slowly. The nurse turned back to her cart. Marjorie stood there for a few more seconds, then turned, then walked. Back to the elevator, down to her room. She didn't eat lunch. She didn't speak during the craft hour. She sat in her armchair and stared at the mirror. At 4:15 p.m. she took out her notebook again and wrote, "They're hiding something. Olive was fine. Then photo. Then gone. Room 8, ill death." Underneath that she added, "Camera above ceiling, chair, machines, people erased." And finally, "Find the pattern before they find me." She waited until after lunch when the halls thinned and the staff disappeared behind closed doors for their daily notes and chart updates. Then she moved. Marjorie slid the slim brown volume from the bookshelf, Emily Dickinson selected poems, the one nobody ever touched. Inside, between torn pages 49 and 50, was a small digital voice recorder wrapped in cotton to muffle clicks. She clicked it on with the edge of her fingernail. A faint red light blinked. It was listening. She sat by the window, speaking in a soft, practiced voice. Entry 4, Thursday afternoon, 2:16 p.m. Olive confirmed deceased. No obituary. No service announced. Her photo still hangs in the room behind the mirror. Preserved. Like a trophy. She paused, glanced around the room, then continued. Something is happening here, something that doesn't want to be seen. I suspect room 8 is used for experimentation testing erasure. A long silence. Then she added, barely a whisper, I need more proof. She clicked the recorder off and slid it back into the hollowed book. Hid the book beneath 2 large print Sudoku magazines, leaned back and stared at the ceiling. The camera in her room wasn't in the obvious places, but she could feel its presence. They were watching, which meant she had to be smarter. That evening she skipped bingo and took a longer route past the medical storage room on the east wing. A hallway most residents avoided because of its sterility. It reeked of disinfectant and latex, and its motion-sensitive lights flickered awake a split second too late. She paused near the corner. Footsteps. 2 of them. One was heavy male, probably staff. The other was light-rushed female. They were whispering. Marjorie pressed her back to the wall, closed her eyes, and listened. Don't have the authorization yet, the woman said. He fits the markers, the man replied. Early confusion, light tremors. Pre-dementia baselines optimal. But there's no consent. He won't remember. They never do. Marjorie didn't breathe. Then a rolling sound. A cart. And faint groan. She dared a peek around the corner. Just enough to catch a glimpse of an orderly young muscular with buzzed hair guiding a thin elderly man in a gray cardigan into a side room. Eugene. He shuffled like his knees were broken glass. Marjorie recognized him. He loved jazz. Whistled Charlie Parker in the elevator. The female staffer hesitated. Her badge read A. Ramirez, LVN. Just do it clean, she said. No bruising this time. I'm not an amateur, the man snapped. The door shut behind them. Marjorie inched back around the wall. She felt sick. She stayed until the hallway emptied, then returned to her room. Not directly. She took the long way, watching faces. Watching who smiled too much and who never looked anyone in the eye. That night, Eugene didn't show up for movie night or breakfast. The next morning, he was pushed in a wheelchair by a nurse. Head tilted, eyes clouded, hands twitching at the tray of food he couldn't eat. He didn't whistle. He didn't speak. Marjorie sat 2 tables away. He didn't recognize her, not even when she dropped her spoon loudly, and he flinched. 3 days later, his nameplate was gone from his door. Staff said he was relocated to specialized care in Boulder. They always said Boulder. She made a note. She also made a map, not just of Belmont's layout, but of time. A timeline. She tore pages from her old planner and taped them to the inside of her armoire. Every name, every face, every natural death, every sudden disappearance. She used red ink for those she'd seen in the photo gallery behind the mirror. Within hours, patterns emerged. Room 3B2D4F. 3 weeks between injection and full cognitive collapse. Always followed by relocation or death in sleep. Always preceded by a new staff rotation. She circled the names of the orderlies she didn't recognize from earlier months, especially the one with the buzz cut. But something still didn't add up. Why were they doing this? What did they gain? Who allowed it? And then came the scream. It was 2:11 a.m. Marjorie sat upright in bed as the sound tore through the hallway like a rusty nail dragging across glass. A woman's voice, old, trembling, hysterical. I don't want to go in there. I won't. I know what happens. The scream collapsed into sobs, wet, desperate sobs. Footsteps, shouting, 2 nurses running past her door. Then silence. She stood in her robe, cracked her door an inch. Trudy, room 212. She was on the floor, clutching her walker like a weapon. Eyes wide, staring at something only she could see. Marjorie heard one nurse say, "We need the sedative." Another, "She's escalating." The cart came. The shot was given. Trudy slumped. Next morning, gone. Heart failure, they said. Marjorie wrote her name in thick red. Underlined it twice. That afternoon, a new woman moved into 212. A silent one. Didn't ask questions. Didn't smile. A day later, the director introduced himself. To Marjorie. It was the first time she'd seen him in person. He came alone, no clipboard, no staff. Tall, trim, mid-50s. Expensive watch-polished shoes. Voice like silk-wrapped gravel. "Mrs. Dunley," he said, shaking her hand in the lobby. "I'm Martin Harris. I've heard so much about you." She offered a practiced smile. Neutral. Curious, but unassuming. "Nothing terrible, I hope." He chuckled. "On the contrary, they say you're sharp, watchful, still very independent." "Habits die hard," she said. He sat across from her in the reading lounge. "Not too close. Just enough." "There's been talk," he began, "of recent upsets. Some of our residents are struggling with adjustment. It happens. Memory, perception. Grief. It gets messy in old age. She said nothing. He tilted his head, studied her. You were a teacher, weren't you? Yes, history. Ah. So you understand that the past can be overwhelming. Sometimes it clings to us even when it's time to let go. She felt her pulse throb. He continued, his tone measured. Our goal here, Mrs. Dunley, is peace, dignity, safety. You understand? Marjorie stared. Do you read poetry, Mr. Harris? He blinked, slightly thrown. Not much, I'm afraid. She smiled faintly. There's a Dickinson line I love. Tell all the truth, but tell it slant. He didn't respond. She leaned forward. I've seen your truth, Mr. Harris. It's not slant. He paused, just a beat, then smiled. Rest well, Mrs. Dunley. He stood, adjusted his cuffs, and walked away. She watched him go. Watched the way the staff stepped aside when he passed, the way the cameras subtly shifted to follow him. And she knew she wasn't imagining anything. She was already inside the machinery, already a part of the plan. The only question now was, would she disappear before or after she finished drawing the full map? It was just past dusk when Marjorie slipped into the garden alcove behind the solarium, a forgotten patch of concrete and ivy where the heater pipes made a soft humming lullaby. That's where Joe liked to sit, away from the echo of television and the forced cheer of activity hours. He was already there, bundled in his threadbare overcoat, hands folded over a chessboard with no pieces, just the board. He never explained why. I thought you wouldn't come, he said without looking up. Marjorie eased down beside him on the stone bench. I had to be careful. He nodded, eyes fixed on the black square in the corner of the board. Something's wrong here, Joe. You think? I went through the mirror. There's a door, a corridor, pictures of the dead, machines I don't recognize. Eugene was taken. Trudy's gone. Olive gone. Joe's jaw tightened. He didn't blink. You're not crazy, he said finally. I was hoping you'd say I was. He shook his head. They tried to get me to volunteer for something last year, some trial. Said I'd get access to better meds, more privacy. I told him no. The next week, my roommate Harold, he took the offer. Month later, he was just gone. Said he got transferred. But no one ever says goodbye when they transfer, do they? She leaned forward. You think someone's behind it, administration? Joe finally looked up. His eyes were gray and sharp like cut granite. There's a name, Harris. You ever hear it? Marjorie nodded slowly. He found me yesterday. He's the hunter, Joe whispered. But someone else writes the list. What list? Joe turned the board toward her, pointed to the black square. This is where you go when you start asking questions. They sat in silence. Then Joe whispered, You should stop. But she didn't answer. And in the morning, Joe was gone. Not dead, not wheeled out under a sheet, just gone. His bed stripped, his nameplate removed. The nurse at the desk blinked twice when Marjorie asked, Mr. Kaplan. Oh, yes. He's been transferred to a care facility in Cheyenne. Family decision. He doesn't have family. I think maybe a cousin? Marjorie stared her down. The nurse looked away. When Marjorie returned to her room, something felt off. She closed the door behind her, turned on the lamp, and froze. Her blanket, folded differently, not just tucked. It had been lifted, touched. Not by the cleaning staff, they were methodical, ritualistic in their patterns. But this fold, this crease, it was a human error. Like someone who had never made a hospital bed tried to mimic perfection. She scanned the room. Nothing out of place yet, everything wrong. She opened her drawer. Notebook still there. Recorder still hidden. But when she touched the base of her lamp, something clicked. She unscrewed the shade. Inside, tucked behind the socket, a small black device. She didn't know what it was, but she knew exactly what it was for. She removed it carefully with a tissue, placed it into an empty pill bottle, and buried it beneath used crossword puzzles in the trash. Then she sat down and wrote a single sentence in her journal. They're listening now. She didn't speak aloud for the rest of the day. That night, she slipped into the library while most residents were at the musical recital. She hated the library, too new, too curated with decorative books and computer screens no one used. But she wasn't there for reading. She was there for the file cabinet. The locked one. She waited until the intern librarian left to fetch tea. Then she moved behind the main desk, used the paperclip she'd straightened earlier. 2 quick clicks. The drawer slid open with a sigh. Inside intake records, medication reports, cognitive scores. She flipped fast. Past names she didn't know, until she saw them. Olive G. Weston, admitted Jan 12. Cognitive Index 3.1. Suggested monitoring, minimal transfer to advanced study program. March 9th. Status terminated. Natural causes. She kept flipping. Harold V. Kaplan. Eugene M. Sloan, Trudy A. Carmichael. All the same. Cognitive index above 3.0. Transferred to advanced study. Dead or relocated within 90 days. And every single one, roommate initiated. She scribbled notes into her sleeve on a torn piece of catalog paper. When the intern returned, she was already back at the magazine rack flipping through a 2014 issue of Birdwatchers Monthly. That night she took all the notes, names, and threads and made the map again, this time on the back of her curtain with chalk. Timeline, symptoms, transfers, deaths, room 8, a pattern so clear it practically screamed. But then another whisper, outside her door. Dunley. Yes, Suite 217, no history of dementia but showing signs of paranoia, might be our next candidate. Male voice, young, controlled. Female voice replied, should we initiate the screening protocol? Wait a week. Let her trust the system a little more. Marjorie didn't move, didn't breathe, just pressed her ear to the door until the footsteps vanished, then turned back toward her chalk map. And for the first time in weeks she smiled. They thought she was just starting to fall apart. They had no idea she was about to fall straight into them, by choice. But first, she had to become exactly what they were looking for. She had to disappear into their story, which meant forgetting everything, at least on the outside. She opened the closet, pulled out the blue cardigan that Olive used to wear, and began rehearsing the lines she knew they wanted to hear. It began with the hands. Marjorie stood in front of the mirror, her back straight, her breath controlled. She raised both arms and watched them. Then slowly, she allowed her right hand to tremble just a flicker at first. Subtle. Then she exaggerated it. Let the fingers twitch unnaturally, as if misfiring. Next, she practiced missing the handle of her dresser. Once, twice. Then again deliberately brushing past it as if she couldn't feel the metal. She whispered under her breath, "Not there, not there. Where's the light?" Pause. Then she said her daughter's name, Helen. Then again Hazel. She looked herself in the eyes. Hannah. Then she smiled, vacant, disjointed, like someone trying to recognize a dream slipping through their hands. Perfect. She lowered her hands and sat back down, exhausted not by the act, but by the knowledge of what she was preparing to invite into her life. They would watch. They were already watching, and she needed them to believe she was ready. The next morning she retrieved the old Tram Talk from the back of her drawer. It was silver, delicately curved with a hummingbird at the tip, gifted by Helen on her 75th birthday, back when visits were still frequent, and laughter wasn't something she had to rehearse. She opened the back casing of the brooch. Inside, where the enamel had worn thin, she carefully slid in the camera chip she'd bartered from a dying tech in room 1D, a former engineer who had hidden the device inside a hollowed Bible. He died 2 days after. The camera was the size of a split pea. No battery needed. It synced with the motion sensor and recorded on loop to a micro SD tucked into the hairpin's clasp. Marjorie checked its blink, one red pulse every 5 seconds. Still alive. She slid the tram into her bun and twisted it to lock. Her weapon was in place. She stared at her reflection, saw both a spy and a relic staring back. Then she turned away. She didn't have time to mourn herself. The next step required more risk. In the rec room, she waited until staff attention thinned. Lunchtime always pulled them toward the dining area. She slid her handwritten letter into an old medical envelope she'd swiped from the nurse's cart. No return address, just Helen's name. Dr. Helen Dunley, Department of Gerontology, University of Colorado Hospital, Denver, CO. She'd written in code. Not ciphers, nothing childish, but memories. Half real, half warning. Phrases only Helen would recognize from their bedtime rituals or backyard conversations. Inside, she included a single frame from the mirror room, Olive's photo, which she'd snapped through a sliver of reflection on a compact mirror aimed at the hidden wall. Blurry, haunting, unmistakable. She sealed it tight and handed it to the mail desk before anyone could notice. 3 days later, the envelope was back. Not in her mailbox, but on her pillow. Unopened. Stained with something she hoped was tea. Attached was a sticky note in juvenile handwriting. Recipient address not found. Please verify. She held the note in her hand until it crumpled like a lung collapsing. That night, she sat in the corner of her room, knees pulled up, staring at the blank television screen. Her reflection floated in it, fragile and still. If they had intercepted her message, that meant the network extended outside Bellamont. Helen wasn't unreachable. She was being kept from reaching. That changed the math. If she couldn't alert the outside world, she'd have to burn this place from the inside, which meant she needed an invitation to room 8. It was time to break character. She waited until 2:13 a.m. Then she pulled her emergency cord. When the nurse arrived, she was huddled in the closet, mumbling. Who left the gas on?" she whispered. "The baby. He's still in the tub." The nurse froze. "What baby, Mrs. Dunley?" Marjorie blinked slowly. Her mouth fell open like a fish, remembering it once lived in water. "Where's my father?" she asked. "He said I could go swimming today." The nurse gently led her out of the closet and onto the bed. Marjorie flinched from the light, clutched her robe like armor. "Don't let them take my teeth," she said. "They stole my teeth last night." The nurse made notes. 30 minutes later, she left. Marjorie lay there staring at the ceiling, waiting. The next morning, 2 people entered her room. One was a staff nurse she'd never seen before, male, mid-30s, clipboard. The other was Harris. His smile was weaponized. "Good morning, Mrs. Dunley," he said, as if the room were bathed in sunlight and not slow-burning dread. "How are we feeling today?" She looked at him, eyes glassy, unfocused. "Did I already eat?" He turned to the nurse. "I think it's time," Harris said softly. The nurse nodded. "We'd like to transition you to our special care suite," he said for closer observation. "Just a few days." Marjorie blinked. "I didn't pack. We'll take care of everything," Harris said. She nodded slowly. Then as they moved to her closet, she whispered, "Will the mirror come too?" They froze. Harris's eyes lingered on her longer than they should have. Then he smiled. "You won't need mirrors where you're going," he said. And just like that, it was done. They gave her an hour to freshen up, but they sent a nurse to watch her. She made sure to misbutton her blouse, spill water on the floor, put her socks on inside out. The nurse noted it all. Perfect. While pretending to fold her shawl, she slipped the tram tuck into her bathrobe pocket and double-knotted it shut. In her drawer, she left a single note. "If you find this and I'm gone, burn everything behind the mirror." As she zipped up her bag, her hands trembled, not from fear but from anticipation. They thought she was unraveling. But Marjorie Dunley had never been more stitched together in her life. She looked around her room one last time, then walked to the door. It opened without a sound. The hallway was long and white and cold, and at the far end of it waited room 8, the place where memories vanished and names became whispers on laminated charts. She was ready to go in, but she wasn't going to come out quiet. They didn't wheel her in. That would have made it too obvious, too clinical. Instead, Marjorie walked under her own power, flanked by 2 aides in white scrubs and unreadable faces. Her slippers scuffed faintly across the waxed vinyl floor as they led her down the south wing corridor, past doors with muted plaques and surveillance domes in every corner. She kept her eyes down, kept her breathing slow, kept her mind sharp, counting each breath between hallway intersections. 6 left turns, 4 rights. Then without a word, they stopped in front of a plain white door. No number, no window, no welcome. The male aide produced a keycard and tapped it against the panel. A beep, a hiss. The lock disengaged with the sound of a pressure seal being released. One of them gently touched her shoulder. "Mrs. Dunley." She looked up vacant. "Is this the cafeteria?" The door opened and Marjorie was guided into what might have once been a hospital room, but no longer. The space was rectangular, sterile white from floor to ceiling, illuminated by cold LED panels that hummed faintly above. There were no curtains, no artwork, no furniture aside from a single vinyl-covered recliner bolted to the floor and a slender white table beside it. The walls pulsed slightly with the hum of hidden systems, air filtration, oxygen circulation, something else she couldn't name. This was not a room for healing. This was a room for reprogramming. She took a slow step in. The aides helped her into the recliner without asking. The chair hissed as it adjusted to her frame, automatically elevating her feet and pressing a scanner softly against her right wrist. A red light blinked. Identified Dunley Marjorie. Cycle initiated. A chime sounded overhead. The door shut behind her. No lock clicked, but she knew it was sealed. She didn't flinch. She blinked twice. The tiny red LED in her trum tuck blinked back, still recording. She let her hands tremble just a bit. A few minutes passed in silence. Then the wall across from her split open with a soft hydraulic sigh. A section retracted and in stepped Harris. No white coat, no badge. Just a tailored gray suit navy tie and hands too smooth for a man his age. He smiled at her, warm and utterly devoid of warmth. "Mrs. Dunley," he said, "how are you feeling today?" She squinted. "Is this the spa?" Harris chuckled. "In a way." He crossed the room slowly, notepad in hand, but never looked down at it. He was studying her. "I'm told you've had some disorientation lately." Marjorie shrugged, letting her shoulder roll half-heartedly. "I keep dreaming about my sister," she murmured. "But I never had one." "Funny, isn't it?" Harris tilted his head. "Dreams are how the mind tells us what it forgot to say during the day." He sat on the edge of the white table just inches from her. His tone lowered. "You know, memory is a funny thing. We treat it like a treasure chest, but it's more like a swamp. Full of old, tangled things, regrets, resentments, dust. Resentments." She blinked slowly, tilted her head. "Do you know what happens when we take the dust away?" he asked. She didn't respond. "We find the true self." He leaned in slightly. "This place, Mrs. Dunley, is where people are reborn." She gave him a crooked smile. "I must have died and not noticed." He stood. The wall behind him beeped softly, and a panel opened. A small cart rolled forward on silent wheels, holding several vials of clear liquid and a sterilized syringe tray. A robotic arm descended from the ceiling and made a gentle chirping sound. Marjorie kept her gaze soft, non-reactive. Harris walked to the cart and picked up a vial. "This is something new," he said casually. "Still in trial phases. You're among the pioneers. We call it Remilux. Think of it as a key to unlock the version of yourself that's been waiting under all that noise." He didn't ask for consent. He didn't explain risks. He just moved toward her with the needle. She let her arm go limp. The prick was sharp, the sting brief. She watched him closely, silently, counting backward in her head 10, 9, 8. She let her eyes flutter, allowed her mouth to go slack just slightly. He stepped back, satisfied. Overhead, a voice buzzed from a hidden speaker. "Recording initiated. Patient Dunley Marjorie. Session 1. A new light activated near the ceiling, green blinking." Then the questions began. "What year is it?" She waited 3 seconds too long. 2028. "Close," Harris said kindly. "Do you remember your daughter's name?" She furrowed her brow, then offered Haley. No, she was a bird, not a person. Or was it a plant? "Interesting," Harris said, scribbling nothing. For the next 15 minutes the questions came like rain. "Who was president? Where were you born? Do you remember your husband? What happened yesterday?" She fumbled every answer with precision. Between each question she blinked upward toward the ceiling dome just above the recliner. But what she was watching wasn't their camera. She was watching hers. The small black pearl embedded in the center of her hummingbird hairpin, visible only when her head was tilted just enough to catch the glare of the overhead lights. One red pulse. Still working. Still witnessing. More injections followed. Nutritional, they said. Vitamin-based. But she knew better. Each shot came with a slight metallic taste behind her teeth. A dull ache that crawled behind her eyes. Still she stayed limp, passive, even as the robotic assistant placed soft bands across her wrists and ankles. For safety, Harris said only temporary, even as the walls began playing soft classical music. Even as the recliner adjusted again, angling her head slightly back like a camera subject waiting for the flash. She kept blinking, slow, steady, letting the trum capture every second. Because this room, this chamber of science dressed in silence, was their cathedral, and she would burn it from the inside with the truth. As the session wound down, Harris stood once more and smoothed his tie. "We'll continue tomorrow," he said gently. Then, with a grin that never reached his eyes, he added, "You're making excellent progress." He left without another word. The panel closed, and Marjorie, still strapped in, turned her eyes one final time to the ceiling. The dome stared back. She whispered so faint it barely moved her lips. "Still here." The red dot blinked once, twice, then pulsed brighter, and kept recording. They started feeding her through scheduled trays, pre-packaged and labeled protein fiber mood stabilizers, mild sedatives. The food was always warm, always soft, always suspicious. Marjorie tasted the iron in the mashed lentils on the third day. It wasn't the kind of flavor you misread. It sat on the tongue, dull and sharp at the same time. Something was being delivered with the nourishment, something designed to soften her blur, her edges coax her further into compliance. But Marjorie hadn't survived this long without learning how to slip a trick through a smile. She began stashing her pills under her tongue, releasing them later into the toilet with a flush and a prayer. At mealtimes, she coughed into her napkin, slipped a sachet of powdered valerian into the soup enough to induce sluggishness, but not sedation, enough to muddy the data. Every dose they recorded on her charts began to falter. Heart rate irregular. Cognitive responses erratic. Confusion but inconsistent. Comprehension but intermittent. Their metrics glitched. The numbers didn't match their expectations, and that bought her time. She used it carefully. One afternoon during vitals check, she noticed the younger nurse, the one with the crescent moon tattoo on her wrist, lingering too long on the oxygen gauge. Not in error, in thought. Her name tag read June, RN in training. Marjorie waited until they were alone. The restraints had been lifted, for now her progress was promising. June adjusted the IV drip silent. Marjorie didn't speak at first, just whispered, "Do you ever wonder what happened to Trudy?" June froze. She turned, lips parted, slightly, eyes cautious. "She had a heart condition," June said quickly. "No," Marjorie replied gently. "She had a will." June looked at the door. No alarm, no cameras visible, but they were there, always embedded, always humming. "I don't know anything," June said, but her voice was softer now. "You know enough to feel it in your chest," Marjorie replied. "That cold press when something's not right. You feel it, don't you?" June hesitated, then whispered, "They said this place would be different. Better. They said that to me too, and Olive, and Eugene, and Joe." June blinked. "I can't." "You can," Marjorie said. "I don't need you to expose anything, just give me access." June stared, then nodded almost imperceptibly. That night during shift change, June returned. She dropped a folded towel on Marjorie's table. Inside it was a white plastic security badge marked Internal Access, Research Server. No name, just a QR strip and a green LED that flickered once when touched. Marjorie stared at it. She reached up to the hummingbird brooch, felt the trom press warm against her scalp, pulsing steadily. She was going to get it out. The next morning, under the guise of a scheduled walk to the physical therapy wing, she requested to visit the recreational tech station, a rarely used room outfitted with 2 aging desktops for cognitive games. She played along, smiled blankly, asked the aide, "Can I do a puzzle on the computer?" Permission was granted. The aide stood at the door, distracted by a clipboard. Marjorie slid into the chair badge in her lap. The login screen blinked. She touched the badge to the scanner. A soft beep. Access granted. The system opened into an intranet portal, a sterile interface with files marked Neural Cycle Belmont and MemReact Trialate. She didn't waste time. She removed her slipper. Inside, under the sole wrapped in foil, was a microdrive. It had taken her days to hollow it correctly, to make sure the device didn't trigger metal detectors. It was warm from her skin, but intact. She plugged it in, selected 3 files, the camera footage from room 8, the syringe logs, the patient decline charts, and a 4th file, one that Harris had marked live demo conference stream.mp4. She blinked. There it was. Their plan. Belmont was going public. Harris stood in the executive briefing room, dressed in crisp navy tie, straight expression polished. Behind him, a large screen glowed with the conference's waiting room physicians researchers press. The University of Colorado was co-hosting. National exposure. Today, Harris said, facing the small team of handlers, we present the future of elder cognition management. We present Remilux. The handlers clapped politely. Dr. Helen Dunley, he added, will be our keynote. Her voice will reinforce credibility. A woman stepped in beside him. Curly dark hair aged like tempered glass. Her face was tight. Her eyes tired. She didn't look at Harris when she nodded. Marjorie's daughter had arrived. She didn't know yet. Not everything, but she would. Back in the sterile cell of room 8, Marjorie stared at the computer as the files finished uploading. The final one, the clip from her hairpin cam. Her face, Harris, the needle, the phrases. You're making excellent progress. All of it. Embedded, spliced, converted. She pulled the drive free, tucked it into the slipper, then sat and waited. The live broadcast began at noon. All around the country, doctors tuned in. Nurses, hospital execs, ethics boards. The screen opened with Harris's voice. Welcome to the future of cognitive renewal. He smiled into the camera, the room behind him modern and bright. Marjorie stood now. She held the staff badge in one hand, in the other the drive. She stepped toward the terminal again, accessed the system a second time. Her fingers trembled, but not with fear. This was what she'd rehearsed in her head night after night. She bypassed the preloaded conference deck and uploaded her version, titled Remember Me Final MP4. She hovered over the stream. One click. A single confirmation. The system blinked. You are now live. The feed jumped. The conference froze. Across the country, screens went black, then filled with her image. Marjorie Dunley, 82 years old, alone in a room, staring into the lens. Behind her, the white walls, the recliner, the silence. She said nothing. Then quietly, my name is Marjorie Dunley. I was not supposed to survive this. The video cut to footage from her hairpin. Harris injecting her. His words, the questions, the mechanical voice. Recording initiated. Session 1. Then the chart files, the decline stats. Olive's face, Eugene's, Trudy's. The photos on the wall. A voiceover. We weren't patients. We were data. We were casualties of something they called progress. Harris's voice echoed. You won't need mirrors where you're going. Then silence. Marjorie reappeared this time in low light. Tears in her eyes. But I remembered, she said, because remembering is resistance. She pressed the final button. The screen froze on her blinking trum. That red light pulsing. The signal of witness. Then the video ended. The live stream cut to static. Every line in the room went dead. Every aid froze. Every camera stopped recording. But it was already out. Too late to erase. Too loud to deny. In the corner of the room, Marjorie sat down in the recliner again. Her hands shook. But her heart, steady. The screen in the conference auditorium stuttered once, then went black. A ripple of confusion passed through the crowd. Doctors in pressed suits. Executives with clipped voices. Ethics. Professors from prestigious schools. They whispered, checked their phones, glanced at the stage where Harris stood frozen behind the podium, his face stretched into a smile that no longer fit the room. He looked toward the technician in the back, gesturing for a fix. But before anyone could move, the screen flared back to life. Only this time it wasn't Harris's keynote presentation. It was her, Marjorie Dunley, sitting beneath fluorescent lights, her face framed by sterile white walls. Live, unfiltered, uninvited. Her voice was calm, steady. My name is Marjorie Dunley. I am 82 years old. I am speaking to you today from inside the Bellamont Memory Care Facility. Gasps echoed through the room. Someone dropped a pen. Another leaned forward in their seat, jaw slack. On screen, Marjorie continued. I was placed in a room called Suite 8. I was told it was for my safety. But what happened there, what happens there, still is not safety. It is not medicine. It is not memory care. Behind her, the hidden camera from her Trum Talk played back the events in stark detail. Harris approaching her with a syringe. The needle-piercing skin. The monotone voice from overhead. Session 1. Recording initiated. Do you remember your daughter's name? Helen, she murmured. A beat. Then Hazelnut, she was a bird. Or a plant. The audience sat motionless, riveted, repulsed. Then came the real. Olive Weston. Eugene Sloan. Trudy Carmichael. Photo after photo, date after date. Each timestamp matched the records Harris had scrubbed clean. Each one aligned with patients transferred or deceased from natural causes. Footage of the chair. The injections. The murmured phrase from Harris as he adjusted her IV. Sometimes the most merciful thing you can do is let them forget. Marjorie's voice returned layered above the horrors. But we didn't forget. We remembered each other. We remembered ourselves, even when they tried to rewrite us. In the front row, Helen Dunley stood up slowly, her face drained of blood. She pushed her glasses higher on her nose, staring at the image of her mother. Her hands trembled. Behind her, someone whispered, "Is that?" She didn't answer. Her knees locked. Then came the final shot. A tight, still frame of Harris leaning into Marjorie's face, his voice a low whisper. "Don't worry, you'll feel nothing after this. Just air and sleep." The feed cut. The room fell into silence so dense it crushed every attempt at denial. Then exploded. Phones were pulled out. Voices raised. Someone screamed. "This is a violation of every standard." Others moved toward the exits, urgently placing calls. Harris turned on stage. His composure cracked at the edges. He moved toward the wings of the conference room, pushing past a confused intern and vanishing behind the curtain. But news spreads like fire once oxygen hits it. By the time he reached the side corridor, his earpiece crackled with chaos. Sir, internal servers are down. They're playing the footage in the nurses' lounge. Sir, Channel 9 is asking for comment. Security is asking if you want an escort. He didn't answer. He just walked faster. He passed the administration hall, then pushed open the door marked Storage B, the same shortcut he'd used a dozen times before to slip out quietly. But this time someone was waiting. June stood near the maintenance cart uniform, wrinkled eyes wide but steady. She didn't move. She just said quietly, "You knew. You always knew." Harris hesitated. He didn't smile this time. "Move. You hurt people," she said. "Do you think the world takes care of them better?" He snapped, stepping forward. "Do you think dignity means watching them shit themselves and forget their children?" Her jaw clenched. "You made that choice for them." He stepped closer. "Some people don't need a choice, they need release." She didn't blink. "And you get to be the one who decides." Behind her footsteps, heavy, fast, cuffed boots, Harris turned just in time to see two uniformed officers barrel through the hall. Martin Harris. One barked, "You are under arrest for felony assault, unlawful experimentation on protected individuals, criminal conspiracy." He ran for 3 steps, then slammed shoulder first into the metal door. June didn't move. The officers tackled him hard, pressing him to the ground. As the cuffs clicked shut, Harris didn't resist. He turned his head slightly, caught a glimpse of the security cam mounted above the door. He smirked. "They're not going to remember this next week," he muttered. The officer hauled him to his feet. "That's where you're wrong," a voice said behind them. Marjorie stood at the end of the hallway, wearing her robe tram still in place, face ghost pale, but burning with something stronger than vengeance. Conviction. Harris looked at her. For the first time truly looked. She stepped closer. He said softly, "Death is sometimes more humane than living in confusion." Marjorie's voice didn't shake. "Not when you get to decide who's confused." He didn't respond. The officers dragged him away. June exhaled for the first time in a full minute. Marjorie turned and leaned against the wall. She felt her pulse in her wrists. Her lungs burned. But she was still standing, still remembering, still herself. The Bellamont building stood hollow and locked behind caution tape. Yellow bands fluttering in the wind like warning flags over a battlefield no one had prepared for. Reporters gathered outside for days, broadcasting from the once pristine brick steps where Marjorie had watched the seasons change behind glass. Now it was all silence and scandal. Inside, the corridors were stripped bare. No music, no nurses, no flowers. The recliners were carted out, the artificial orchids thrown into dumpsters behind the east wing. The scent of bleach clung to the walls like guilt that wouldn't rinse off. One by one, the patients were relocated. Some went to private homes, some to hospitals. Many had no family left, but their names were now known. Their stories were now told. The State Commission moved quickly. Investigations launched. Lawsuits filed. Harris was denied bail, his mugshot printed beside a headline that read, "God of Forgetfulness, Doctor accused of playing death dealer in dementia scandal." And in every article, one name returned over and over, Marjorie Dunley. They called her the grandmother who remembered, the last conscience of Bellamont, Colorado's silent whistleblower. But she never called herself anything. She just sat quietly by the window in a hospital recovery suite, watching the sky shift between shades of apology. Then came Helen. She arrived with a coat too expensive and eyes too tired. Her hair was tied back. She carried a tote filled with folders, press passes, and unopened envelopes. She didn't knock, just stepped into the room and stood there stunned, staring at the woman who had just weeks ago been a silent old woman in a lockdown ward. "Hi, Mom." Marjorie turned, a slow, uncertain smile. "You're taller." Helen laughed once, but it cracked mid-breath. She crossed the room and hugged her mother like someone catching a falling tree. They sat by the window, hands folded, tea cooling on the tray. "I saw everything," Helen whispered. "I didn't believe it at first. When I saw your face on the stream, I thought someone had deep-faked it." Marjorie raised a brow. "Do I look like someone who knows how to deep-fake?" Helen smiled, then wiped her cheek. A long silence. Then Helen said what had sat between them for a decade. "I was angry with you. For staying, for choosing that place instead of living with me." Marjorie nodded. "I know." "Why?" Helen asked. "I offered. I begged." Marjorie looked down at her tea, then out the window to the trees whose branches moved with quiet restraint. "Because I knew something was wrong," she said. "Even before it had a name. The way people disappeared. The way staff changed. The way the mirror never reflected quite right. And you stayed. I had to. You didn't have to. Marjorie turned to her eyes soft but unyielding. If I didn't stay, who would have seen it? Who else was left? Who still remembered how to listen? Helen looked away. Marjorie reached for her hand. I didn't stay because I was stubborn. I stayed because silence doesn't break itself. Outside a crow called once, sharp, distant. The hospital hallway murmured with distant carts and heels. Helen squeezed her mother's hand. I never stopped needing you, she said. Marjorie smiled. Then you were luckier than most. Within the week, Marjorie was offered everything. A feature with 60 minutes. An honorary doctorate from the university where Helen taught. A memoir deal 7 figures. They sent a representative from Washington with a pin and a plaque. You're a national symbol of vigilance, he told her. She shook his hand, smiled politely, and didn't say a word. Because none of it mattered. Not now. The real reward had already happened. The truth had been seen, and the ones they tried to erase had their names spoken out loud again. But that didn't mean she wanted to become anyone's symbol. She declined the interviews. She returned the plaque. When the foundation asked if she would serve as an elder justice ambassador, she wrote on the form, "Justice doesn't need ambassadors. It needs memory." She moved in with Helen briefly. The house was large, sterile, over-decorated. She wandered the halls like a museum docent searching for a memory that didn't live there. Helen tried, she really did. Dinners with salmon and greens, classical music in the mornings, yoga for joint integrity. But Marjorie wasn't built for stillness after fire. One morning she sat at the breakfast nook stirring her tea with the same old trum in her hair and said, "I love you, honey." "I love you too," Helen said. "But I can't stay." Helen looked up. "I need to be somewhere where the forgetting hasn't already taken over." Helen nodded. This time she didn't argue. She just packed the trum in a velvet pouch, slipped the microdrive into her mother's coat pocket, and whispered, "Wherever you go, don't stop telling them." Marjorie kissed her cheek and left. The sun filtered through Helen's kitchen windows in muted gold, catching the edge of the porcelain coffee pot that hadn't been used in years. She walked down the stairs barefoot, rubbing her eyes, expecting to find her mother in the breakfast nook, reading old newspapers and humming under her breath like she had every morning that week. But the chair was empty. The teacup was clean. And on the counter, neatly tucked beneath the trum talk in its velvet pouch, was a folded sheet of paper with handwriting that hadn't changed in 4 decades. Helen unfolded it, heart thudding louder than it should have. "Helen, I've heard the voices of those who were silenced. Now I want to sit beside the ones no one ever asked to speak. Don't worry, I packed light. Love always, Mom." Beneath the signature was a single line written in firmer, darker ink. "Tuổi già không phải là chẳng dụng để chết, mà là khởi đầu để kể lại điều người trẻ hay bỏ qua." Helen sat down slowly, pressed the note to her chest, and laughed, a quiet, stunned, almost proud sound that echoed off the cold tile. 2 states south. The bus rolled along a dusty 2-lane highway, its suspension groaning at every turn. The windows were fogged from inside bodies pressed against them, heads slumped. Most of the passengers were older, some alone, others clutching paper bags and thermoses like anchors. Marjorie sat near the back, her coat wrapped tightly around her, her fingers curled around a small notebook. The microdrive was tucked safely inside her inner pocket, not because she planned to use it again, but because memory once rescued deserved to be carried. The driver glanced at her through the mirror as they pulled into the town El Cielo, New Mexico. Population 1,294. Dust in the gutters, faded paint on the diners, a post office that hadn't updated its sign since Reagan. The bus hissed to a stop outside a 2-story brick building with ivy growing wild over one side. The sign out front read, "Santa Rita Elder Living, Independent and Assisted." The letters were chipped, the roof slouched, but inside someone was playing an out-of-tune piano. Marjorie smiled. She stepped off the bus with both feet planted firmly in the gravel. No one met her, no fanfare, just the warm smell of bread and old wood. She entered the front lobby and was greeted by a single nurse behind a reception desk with a cracked phone and a blinking landline light. "Can I help you?" the nurse asked, glancing up. Marjorie set her bag down gently. "I'm here to stay," she said, "not as a patient, as a listener." The nurse blinked. "I don't think I won't be any trouble." Marjorie interrupted. "I can sweep. I can help serve. I can sit with the ones who don't speak anymore, but mostly I tell stories. That got the nurse's attention. Stories. Not mine, Marjorie said. Theirs. By the third day, the residents began to notice her. She wasn't part of the staff. She didn't wear a badge or carry a clipboard. But she appeared in the lunchroom, the garden, the chapel. She carried a notebook and sat beside those no one else sat beside. She listened. To Dolores, who used to build bridges before she started forgetting her husband's face. To Ivan, who wrote poetry in Russian under his breath and hadn't spoken English in months, until Marjorie asked him what love sounded like in winter. To Maya, who had been deaf since childhood and only communicated in glances, but glances that said more than words ever could. Each story Marjorie captured quietly, not to archive, to honor. On the seventh day, a young woman with a local TV crew showed up. It was part of a human kindness feature meant to run between weather updates and high school football results. The segment was supposed to last 3 minutes. They stayed for 2 hours. The reporter, maybe 25, leaned in with her mic and asked Marjorie in a voice softened by small-town awe, "Mrs. Dunley, why here? You could be anywhere now. Why come to El Cielo?" Marjorie looked out the window at the faded sky. "Because they're still here," she said. "Who?" "The ones no one ever asked to speak. The ones we put in places like this and forget while they're still breathing. I'm not here to save anyone. I'm here to hear them." The reporter blinked. Marjorie continued, her voice clear and slow. Toija isn't a layover before death. It's a frontier. A final edge where all the truths we spent our lives hiding come back and ask to be seen. A long pause. Then the camera operator lowered his rig and wiped his eyes. Weeks passed. A mural was painted on the side of Santa Rita, a woman with white hair surrounded by shadows holding a lantern made of pages and faces. Children came by to ask if the story lady was home. She always was. And every time they asked why she came, why she stayed, why she gave up the comfort of her daughter's guest house and the attention of the national press, she'd just point to the bench beneath the cottonwood where Maya sat scribbling in charcoal and say, "Because some stories are so quiet you have to sit still enough to hear them." And then she'd lean in and listen. The sunlight came through the mesquite trees in long golden ribbons, tracing shapes on the dusty tile floor of the Santa Rita common room. The kind of light that didn't rush, the kind that waited for stories. Outside, the wind carried the scent of desert rain, though the sky hadn't cracked in weeks. Inside, time moved differently, slow, deliberate, like a page turned by hand. In the far corner of the room, Marjorie sat in a half-circle of old chairs, surrounded by 8 residents. Their expressions were unreadable at first. Some stared at her with open awe, others with the wary tightness of lives spent being spoken to but never asked. Marjorie had no script. She simply leaned forward, hands folded, and said in her warm, steady voice, "Once when I was 9, I saw a horse carved out of wind." A few laughed softly, unsure if she was joking, but she wasn't. Her voice carried. "It was during the war. I was sick, coughing blood in the middle of summer, and my father wouldn't let me out of the house. So I used a flashlight and made shadows on the wall. First my fingers, then twigs, then anything I could find. And one night by accident I made a horse." The others leaned in now, gently pulled by her cadence. "I don't know why it mattered. I don't remember what I named it, but I remember how free it looked when I moved the light." A man in the group chuckled. "You made a shadow into a stallion." Marjorie smiled. "No, sweetheart. The stallion was always there. I just found the right angle." They laughed. Someone began to cry, Dolores maybe. Her fingers trembled as she covered her mouth. But she wasn't sad. Marjorie went on. The stories that followed weren't grand, they weren't tidy. They were ragged, full of broken sentences and crooked memories. She spoke of mistakes she never got to apologize for, of people she used to be, of Joe and Olive and the ones who vanished without anyone to remember their hands. And they listened. They didn't interrupt. They didn't correct, because they knew every person in that room had been waiting to be reminded that memory was not a curse. It was survival. At one point, someone shut off the lights, and a small flashlight, barely stronger than a penlight, clicked on behind her. The beam landed on the wall. It trembled, then focused. A shape appeared, 4 legs, a strong chest, a crooked tail. A horse, cast in the shadow of an old woman's hand. Someone whispered. She brought it back. And Marjorie, without turning, said quietly, "It never left." Outside behind the trees, a figure stood still, half hidden by leaves. Helen. She didn't call out. She didn't walk closer. She simply watched, her mother framed in amber, alive in a way she hadn't seen in years. She watched as the woman who once terrified the nation's most powerful institutions now leaned forward to hold the hand of a man who couldn't remember his own birthday. She watched as the room of ghosts turned into a room of fireflies, soft blinking and luminous in their attention. She wiped her eyes, took one quiet step back, but then from inside Marjorie's voice called gently, "I know you're there, Helen." Helen stopped. Marjorie didn't look back. She didn't need to. "I always see you, even when you think I don't." Helen's breath caught, and for a moment she was a little girl again, hiding behind the couch, listening to bedtime stories she swore she was too old for. Then she smiled and stayed hidden, because some moments didn't need reunions. Some just needed to be. That night the desert cooled. Wind traced through the windows and settled between the pages of Marjorie's journal. She closed the final entry with a single sentence. "I remembered them. Now I let them remember themselves." She placed the notebook on the shelf beside the small reading lamp. Next to it, she set the Trumtalk no longer in her hair, but standing upright in a simple glass jar. The red light was dark now. Its job was done. She looked around the room, plain, sun-washed, nothing fancy. But it was hers. She moved slowly to the door, placing her hand on the frame. A soft click as she closed it behind her. The last light of the day spilled across the floor in a golden band touching the hem of her robe, and for a moment the whole room looked like it had been dipped in memory. Then darkness. The screen fades to black. A long pause. Then white letters appear. "For all the forgotten voices now told. For all the voices that were forgotten, you have now been heard."